So hello everyone, I'm Kathy Quince. I'm the Executive Director of Cool Choices, and I'm delighted you could join me today for this discussion about accelerating sustainable practices in communities. This webinar is one of a series of 4 webinars we're doing with support from the Carolyn Foundation to really help communities, particularly in the Midwest, accelerate their community-based sustainability efforts. So we're delighted you could join us today for this webinar and encourage you to check out the others in the series. Today we're really going to focus on kind of the principles in behavior change that help you expand and accelerate efforts in a community, and mostly this is things tied to social norms. So we're going to mostly talk about social norms today, and then in other webinars we'll focus on some other things like choice architecture and other behavioral strategies. When I think about accelerating practices at the community level, particularly in the Midwest, I always think it's important to start by acknowledging the advantage we have in this. So encouraging sustainability can be hard in a ton of ways. One of the advantages we have, though, when we're talking about this in the Midwest is the fact that it resonates. I would argue it resonates with our DNA, that Midwesterners are pragmatic. They're not inclined to kind of do lavish things with their resources. You know, we have a certain propriety almost in what we do. You know, we're not ones to waste imprudently, and I think that's something to really think about leveraging off of. That crosses all kinds of partisan and political boundaries, and it's an advantage for you as a sustainability advocate to think about how do I frame what we're doing in a way that reflects this core value, that we are practical people who don't waste things, because that's just not good practical Midwest ways to be. So that's like just a piece of thinking about an anchor you can use in this. And, you know, it's an important anchor because in a whole lot of ways, promoting sustainability is really hard, and there are lots of challenges. And, you know, we're going to spend time today talking about how you leverage social norms, how you get people to see what other people are doing to move things forward. And relative to sustainability, that can be pretty tricky, and partly it's tricky because a lot of what you're doing at the community level or the personal level to be sustainable is invisible to others. So you may well have done some really important lighting retrofits in some of your community facilities. And, you know, for the regular person walking into that office, they're not going to notice those lighting retrofits. Their lights are on. You know, regular folks aren't that tuned into one form of lighting over another. And even when things are a little bit more obvious, we often don't notice them. So perhaps your school district has implemented a no idling policy, so buses aren't idling. And, you know, the reality is you notice a bus is idling when you're right behind it and breathing in the fumes. If it's not idling, you're probably not going to notice. So there's this challenge about inherently how invisible these things are, and that's exacerbated if you think about things at the personal level or in people's personal workspaces. We don't know what other people are doing. We don't know if they're turning the lights off, if they're choosing to wash full loads of laundry. You know, there's a whole lot that we can't see in a practical way. And that matters because as human beings, we take a lot of cues from what we see others doing. And when we can't see what others are doing, sometimes our sense of what the norm is can get a little warped. I often say that, you know, when it comes to sustainability, most of us presume the problem is someone else. The data on the right comes from a Joyce Foundation study that they did a few years ago, surveying Americans, asking them, so how does your household energy usage compare to similar homes in your community? And what is important here is 9%, less than 1 in 10 of us think that our usage is higher than the norm. Everybody thinks they're average or better than average in terms of energy usage. So we're not the problem. It's not me, it's you. And you know, from a behavioral perspective, that's perfectly understandable. It turns out that as human beings, we've evolved in a way that we're better at noticing what people do wrong than what they do right. And if you think about, you know, more primitive societies, that makes some sense. You want to notice if somebody is hoarding the food or doing something else antisocial. That's probably more important in the long run than noticing someone who's sharing the food, kind of thing. So we have this tendency to see the negative. And so I noticed that Bill made copies that he didn't double side, or that Anne left her car running in her driveway while she ran in to do something. And from those isolated moments, I conclude that I'm a lot greener than they are. I'm maybe not noticing that Bill bikes to work and composts and all kinds of other things. It's just, you know, I see those couple of negative things and I reach a conclusion. And if I conclude that I'm already a lot greener than everybody else, then that means that the messages my community is putting out there about ways I could do more, I presume those messages aren't targeting me. I'm already good. That's for somebody else. And so where this takes us, if we don't have a sense of what others are already doing and where we fit into that continuum, if we don't see those social cues, we end up being pretty complacent. I'm good. No problem here. It's other people who have to pay attention to that stuff. And so again, perfectly normal, perfectly human. This is exacerbated, though, by the fact that there are a billion things competing for our attention all the time. You know, we've got all of these things going on, so I'm not spending a tremendous amount of time thinking about how green I am relative to other people. I see a couple of signals and I move on, because after all, I have to remember to pick Billy up from soccer practice. I have to get the report done that my boss wants. I have to do something about the argument my sister and I had last night. There's a billion things going on in my head. And unless we make it really simple for sustainability to be part of what I'm thinking about, it's not going to get any space there. And what happens when it doesn't get any space is we kind of just do what other people are doing. We're well-intentioned, but maybe not very effective. And my kind of favorite visual of this is an image I've used for years, thanks to an energy colleague. And for me, it's just exactly epitomizes the folks that I'm trying to reach when I'm thinking about encouraging people to adopt sustainable practices. Because here you've got guys who know that exercise is good for them, and that's why they're riding the escalator to the gym. When I look at this picture, I always want to note that that second guy on the escalator is on the escalator because the first guy is on the escalator. Okay? It's not, neither of them are really thinking about this, they're just doing. And so we need to recognize that our audience is people who are really busy, who want an easy path forward, and are we sending them signals that help them be part of the solution we want them to be part of? So we really want to focus on how we send these guys signals that help them adopt the sustainable practices that move our communities forward. And in that, the very first thing is that let's not reinforce bad practices. So I think as sustainability advocates, we have a tendency to think that really dramatic statistics, the statistics that make us gasp or kind of reinforce our commitment to our work, are going to play out the same for everyone, and they don't. Very often, when we give people really negative statistics, we're reinforcing bad practices. And let me give you a really specific example. So a few years ago, it seemed like every time I turned around, I was seeing the statistic that 9 out of 10 plastic water bottles are not recycled. And it kind of made me crazy. Probably it made me very crazy and very cranky because I kept seeing this statistic, and all of the behavioral literature is really clear. When a regular person, i.e., not someone who's devoting their time and talent to promoting sustainability, those guys on the escalator, when they hear that 9 out of 10 plastic water bottles are not recycled, they think, oh, so it's really not that big of a deal what I do with this water bottle. Most people aren't recycling them. It's really okay. And you're reinforcing exactly the behavior you don't want. So instead of saying that 9 out of 10 water bottles aren't recycled, I would urge you to think about statistics that put that where people are going to aspire to be in the solution, not the problem. So instead, I might say, in our community, 80% of households support community scale recycling. Also true. And it puts people on the right side of the problem instead of the wrong side of the problem. So thinking about how do you make sure you're not telling people that everyone's doing something wrong in a way that prompts them to do something wrong. And in your community, as you're thinking about this, a really powerful way to showcase good practices is to, of course, share stories and photos of the folks who are doing those good practices. That the more you can give people real examples of local people who are part of the solution, the more powerful that is. And it's important here to be telling local stories. There are amazing sustainability stories at this moment coming out of communities across the country. And, there's sort of a tendency, again, I'll sort of, particularly here in the Midwest, we tend to be pretty modest about what we're doing. So maybe it's like, well, we're not that far yet, but I'll share this story about what New York City's doing. Well, ultimately, if you're a small town in rural Wisconsin or Iowa or Minnesota, a story about what New York City's doing isn't really relevant to you. Far better that you talk about the cool project that happened at the local library where they've got more money for books because of the money they're saving on their energy bill. Or the church that installed solar panels on their roof and has cut their electric usage. Things that are local and genuine and really it's people like us. And telling those stories is really important because as you call out people for being part of the solution, you can really do a lot to move those solutions forward. We talk about this quite a bit, this idea of kind of the virtuous circle that comes from public recognition and positive reinforcement. So when you call out one entity, whether you call out an individual for what they're doing or a business for their leadership on waste management or water conservation, two really important things happen when you do that public call out. So when I, in a meeting, call out Tom as just doing a great job recycling, two things happen. First, there are other people in that meeting, like Alice, who think, well, I'm doing a great job too. I just need to do it more publicly so Kathy notices. So there are people who get fired up because they want recognition. The other thing, though, and I think we don't acknowledge this enough, is when I call out Tom as a sustainability leader, he feels internal pressure to do even more, so he lives up to that label. As human beings, we have a strong need for to be seen as consistent. So when you hail me as being really good at biking to work, I feel pressure to bike more. Because if people see me driving to work after you said I was a good biker, it's going to seem like I just did that for recognition and it's not real. So there's this way that you sort of get two waves off of this. You get the recognized people trying harder so that they prove that they deserve that recognition, and you get other people trying so that they get recognized. And of course, then you've got more people you can recognize, and that just keeps going and going and going. It's a really powerful way to think about how you make visible the right things, and you start creating some of that conversation around this. Because a critical piece of all of this is to really think about how are you going to get people talking about the practices that you want people to adopt so that they're more visible. You need to create a buzz. And, you know, here, I think the element of surprise can be a really effective way to create a buzz. Share a really specific story from social marketing with you that this is kind of a classic success story in this. So this story in a little town in Ohio about 20 years ago, the community leaders were concerned that young drivers, high school students who were first starting out driving, were not wearing their seatbelts very consistently. You know, young people tend to think they're pretty invincible. Seatbelts didn't seem like the coolest thing. And so they really wanted to do something in the community to increase seatbelt use. And the police department was game to experiment with this. So one day, 3:30, classes are out at the high school. You know, people are piling into their cars and leaving the high school, and half a block away are a couple of squad cars who pull over some of these high school students. And so, you know, you've got a couple of high school students pulled over by police officers and a bunch more high school students driving by and seeing those students pulled over. So my story predates cell phones, which just means that these young people who got pulled over, you know, they get home and their phones are, of course, their landlines are ringing off the hook. It's their friends wondering what happened. What did you get in trouble for? How much was the ticket? What did your mom say? Are you going to lose your car? And the friends are astonished when the drivers who were pulled over start laughing. Like, no, you've got it all wrong. The officer pulled me over because he saw I was wearing my seatbelt. He pulled me over to thank me for wearing my seatbelt. In fact, he gave me 2 free movie passes because I was wearing my seatbelt. Didn't you get movie passes? Too bad. Okay, think for a moment about the kind of buzz that creates in that community. The very next morning, as those cars pull into that high school parking lot, more young people are wearing their seatbelts. Because people want to get caught in this particular situation. Now, things like this work when they're random, and I guess it's an iteration of random, they don't happen all the time. So you're not paying people to wear their seatbelts. It's not like you're handing out $20 bills at the end of the driveway. But occasionally, there might be a situation where you get rewarded for this. If you're adopting this practice, there's a chance you'll be caught doing the right thing and get a reward. There's a variation of this that I advocate a lot when people are struggling with folks turning off computers or desk lamps or things in their cubicles. You can do the same thing with chocolate at the beginning or end of the day around computers being on and off. And fundamentally there, you're catching people doing the right things and creating some buzz around that prompts more people to do this. And the buzz is really important. You want people talking about these things because ultimately your quest is culture change. You want people to say things like, well, this is a place where we all turn off our computers at the end of the day. Our community is one where everyone recycles. In our community, people walk to the store. They don't drive 2 or 3 blocks. You want all of those things to be things that people can assert and feel confident that this describes our community. By having them have those conversations, engage around those things, you create really powerful social norms that everyone starts to follow. If I'm new in a workplace and the people who work there say to me, we all turn off our computers when we all turn off our computer monitors when we go to meetings. That's just what we do here. That's a pretty powerful message. As a new person, I'm going to want to fit in. I'm going to turn my monitor off too. That's the power of culture there. Now, the other component of this to really think about is you also want to be sure you're reinforcing that individual actions add up. I think sometimes as sustainability advocates, as data geeks, we maybe get caught in wouldn't it be interesting for everyone to know exactly how much energy they save when they do this one thing, or how much water they save when they do this one thing. And my advice to you is, no, that's not actually interesting or helpful. It's much more effective for you to be telling them how much altogether people are saving. That when you, particularly because a lot of those individual acts can have relatively small savings, that when it's multiplied across everyone in the community, it gets big. But at the individual level, it's really easy to discount those savings. So if you tell me that I'm saving a gallon of water doing something, I'll think, it's a gallon of water, how? But when we talk about our whole community doing this and saving 10 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water, then wow, that's really something. So really thinking about kind of the cumulative impact, which makes it harder for me to rationalize that I'm not part of it. You want to always be framing things in a way that leads toward me doing the right thing. So that was sort of talking about this in kind of a principles way, in a high-level way. I want to give you some really specific community examples of this that maybe fire up your own imaginations about what you could be doing here. So in terms of kind of making things visible, I always think a really good example of that, things like walking school buses. First, when you make things visible that involve children, it's much easier to get attention for that. Those are news people cover those stories. The images are more compelling. And so thinking about how you create examples in your community that you can showcase of, here are people doing the right thing. Here's a group of children as a walking school bus to school. Or here's a city leader who's biking to meetings, kind of thing. So really thinking about some of those ways that you make things really visible to folks can be important. Another really effective way to kind of get this visibility and momentum is, where possible, to share data that helps people see where they are. Remember, we all think we're doing fine because we don't really know what anyone else is doing. In Minnesota, they're doing a great job of benchmarking public facilities across communities. So you can go to this B3 benchmarking website, and you can see this example is schools and the energy use intensity of schools in various communities across Minnesota. And it's compelling and motivating to be able to see that data, where you can show people, here's actually how we compare. Here's some real information about this. In terms of kind of that cumulative thing, giving people a sense of how it all adds up, thought this was an interesting example. This comes from a community in Germany where they've got a sign at the edge of town talking about how much electricity they're generating from their renewable energy system. Now, I would like this better if, instead of talking in kW, they were talking in that they generate enough electricity to power 87 homes or something. I think kW isn't a terribly accessible way to talk about this for regular folks, but I love that there's a cumulative real-time number there that people can go, oh yeah, look, it's growing faster than it used to grow, kind of thing. Something that gives people some of that sense of things is really important. Another kind of good example of that sort of joint momentum, this is again from Minnesota. Hennepin County does this really nice sustainability report where on any number of issues, they're showing you kind of what their goal is and where they're making progress on that goal. So you get a very clear sense of the things we're all doing together are adding up, and here's where we're making really good progress on this. And giving people the chance to celebrate. This is where we've come together and we're accomplishing a lot. And also acknowledging, hey, we're falling short right here. We need everybody to do more. Again, that visibility, so that is like thinking about how the aggregate works. I think at the same time thinking about how you can celebrate individuals being part of the solution, and certainly this is an example from California, from the California drought, where even the state capital there was not watering its lawn, where there were signs saying this is a drought, this is what we're doing. Thinking about how you recognize folks for being part of the solution and give them some props there. Give them some ability to show what they're doing to be part of this. And certainly, I think watering lawns is kind of an interesting example because it's one of the rare things that people can see very visibly across homes in a community. I mean, the challenge with most of the energy and even waste management initiatives are that they're largely inside our homes and more invisible. And so thinking about, well, are there ways to use signage? Could you give lawn signs to folks who achieve a certain energy saving? And which block has the most yard signs? ways to give some recognition there and to make those things more visible. Another piece of visibility is really being where people are. So I think sometimes we tend to think, well, these are the sustainability initiatives, and we'll, on Earth Day, we'll have an event. But we're not thinking about all of the other events that happen in our community. And it's really important, if your community has a summer festival or a fall festival, it's critical that you're there. There's this mass of people in your community coming together. If part of what you're trying to accomplish is to say that sustainable practices is part of who we are, these are things that we do, this is part of our community, then you need to be where the community is. You need to be at those festivals. You need to be where the crowds are, talking about the ways people are part of the solution. This is a great place to celebrate results, to have information at your booth talking about what we've accomplished as a community, maybe some big pictures showing off what various community members have accomplished, and an opportunity for people to learn more and get more involved and become more part of the community solution. Ultimately, you're trying to create an identity. You want your community to be known as a community that rocks at recycling, to be known as a community that is ahead of everyone else in terms of adopting clean energy, that has, done amazing things to create an electric vehicle infrastructure. And again, so remember, the whole recognition thing. As you start to say, we are a community that does this, there's more and more pressure to live up to that statement. So it's okay to say, we're a community that's committed to being a leader in recycling, and give people that opportunity to strive to be that community. Be the change they want to see. So with that, I want to give us a little time for questions. So I'll open it up here. They're in your GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar sidebar. There's a spot where you can enter questions if you've got them. The one other thing I would note is under this Carolyn Foundation grant that's funding this webinar series, we've also got some support to do one-on-one consulting. So if as you're thinking about these things, you've got a particularly sticky issue, but we're really struggling in our community to do X, we've done a lot of communications around saving energy and nothing happened, we don't understand why, we've got some ability to collaborate with you, to look through those marketing materials, to understand what your challenges are, and to maybe offer some insights from the behavioral science field. So certainly if you are interested in that, give me a shout. My email is down there at the bottom. But I also want to have some time here for any questions people have about one of the challenges in our community is that a lot of people are skeptical about what we're doing as around sustainability. They think it's a waste of time. And so there's skepticism. I think we're in an interesting moment in history where we're all talking about how sustainable solutions need to come from the local level, and that we need local governments, mayors, county executives to lead on sustainability. At the same time, we're coping with this kind of unprecedented level of cynicism about whether government can effectively solve problems, and that definitely puts local leaders in a kind of tricky spot. I think part of the answer here is to keep talking about what's going right. So you've got projects you're accomplishing that are saving taxpayer dollars. That's real. You've got projects that might be in one way or another increasing safety or public health. So, for example, if you're reducing the idling of school buses, you're making the air outside the school building cleaner. When little kids with vulnerable respiratory systems are moving in and out of that building. Who doesn't love that? And by the way, you're also saving money when you reduce the idling. So it turns out before, you were spending money that now you can spend on other things in the community. I think some of it is just reinforcing the benefits and not maybe engaging in it doesn't, at some level, it doesn't matter where people stand on bigger politics. We all think our communities using resources effectively is a good idea. Let's start there. We all think our kids breathing clean air is a good idea. Let's start there. So trying to start in some of those common ground places. And again, the more you're celebrating what's happening right in the community, the less you're going to see that pushback. Those good news stories are kind of hard to be cranky about. When you've got a story about the library saving $25,000 a year, who hates that? So I think some of this is just having a really consistent message about these are things that are improving the economics of our community, the well-being of our community. Here's another example. Here's an example from over here. Sometimes those critics are in themselves good examples. Can think of any number of communities we've been involved in where some of the folks who were maybe skeptical about sustainability in one form were actually practicing it very effectively in another form. And so calling them out as an example can be a powerful thing there. At Cool Choices, we talk a lot about how part of our strategy is to be relentlessly cheerful and really keep talking about all of the benefits and all of the ways that people are growing and thriving. And it's just not that much fun to be negative when we're so cheerful. Sort of takes the kind of like an anti-bullying sort of thing. I am not seeing other questions at this point, and because I know you are all incredibly busy and doing incredibly important work, I think we'll end the webinar there. Again, if you've got other questions or want to take advantage of our ability to do some consulting, shoot me an email. We're glad to chat about that. And in the meantime, thanks for all you're doing to make your community more sustainable. And we hope you'll join us for another webinar. Thanks so much. Have a great day.